I'll break it to you gently. You're not cornering on your bike as hard as you think you are. You're not all that. Here's why. So, we'll draw out our sport bike, rear tire, 190 rear tire. Again, I'll do my hideous back view of the motorcycle, your tail and everything else. Well, again, contact patch, middle of the bike. You lean that same bike into the corner, and we'll assume the rider isn't hanging off. So, same bike, in the corner. Line down the center of the bike, back of the swing arm, back of the tail, it's leaned over. Well, where's your contact patch on the road? It's right here. Where's your center of gravity of the bike? Well, if the rider hangs off a little, it changes, but we'll assume he's not hanging off much. And even, the bikes are generally a lot heavier than the rider was. So we'll say, there's your center of mass. There's your measuring line going down the bike. Where is it? Well, it's a good bit away from, the contact patch. So essentially, when you're cranked over at a 45-degree angle, your contact patch on the rear, and it's the narrower the tire, the less it moves, but it's appreciably over from that center of the bike. So, if you're essentially leaning over here, well, even though you're at a 45-degree angle, and you should be pulling, 1G of turning, some centrifugal acceleration, you're really not, because there's an appreciable distance between the center of gravity and then the center point. So all this mass is actually pivoting on the wrong side of your contact points. So we'll say the front one might be here, the rear is there, but again, you split the difference. There's some real distance there, and you're not actually pulling 1G of cornering when the bike is leaned over at a 45-degree angle. And part of that is why smaller, lighter bikes, 125 with real narrow tires, or a 250 in a GP bike. Part of that is why those bikes actually corner a lot harder and faster, and they're more agile and people enjoy riding them. So it's a funny thing, it's like it took me a while to figure that out. And then you have these people that are, a guy hangs off the bike and they knock him. Oh, you're hanging off the bike to get your knee down. That's not good. It's like, yeah, it is. The more you hang off the bike, the more you're keeping the tires, upright, and you're getting a better contact patch. You're letting the suspension work more, because again, everyone knows when a motorcycle is sideways, the suspension, is moving in this direction, and your impacts with the rotor are essentially moving in that direction. Now the problem with that is that all your forces are focused on the contact point of the road, but the center of mass, the CG of you and the bike, is over here. So it's like, here's your center of mass, center of gravity, and all your forces are here. So it's like, it's not an ideal situation. It's just, you're now getting into this thing where it's like, you put an impact there, and it's like, not only is your suspension moving in the wrong direction, but you're rotating around that CG. It's just super, super wonky. And, it kind of, it's almost analogous to what happens with high center of gravity vehicles. I mean, you have the disadvantage of, that funny suspension action. You also have the fact that, as you're sitting here, there's your motorcycle, and, there's your person, there's your arms, there's the center of gravity. Well, again, all your forces are at these contact points. Well, if you go to accelerate or brake, well, all your accelerating, all your braking forces are over here, your CG is here. Well, anytime you want to get on the gas, this whole bike wants to spin out from underneath the rider. And if you brake, it's the opposite. You're braking far away from your center of gravity. So it's like the bike wants to then, pitch into the corner as you brake. It's a really unideal situation. That's why, on a motorcycle, you brake real hard, you crank into the corner, you do your cornering, and then you try to get it out of the corner as quick as possible, and then you can get on the gas. Because anytime you're leaned over, you know, any kind of braking wants to put a, and again, I got to discuss, you know, moments and free body diagrams, but it wants to essentially spin the bike out from underneath the rider. And that's, you know, that's why guys high side coming out of corners when they're still cranked over, because you're essentially riding the bike out from under itself. It's like if I'm standing sideways and I go to run, well, I'm running in circles. I mean, there's no easy way to say it. It's you know, I'm explaining it, and I feel like I'm not doing it justice. But I think that, you know, it makes sense why that happens for sure. And then of course, you know, your high side is when you lose the rear end and you're going to the low side and you catch it, and then when it catches, well, you know, you flipped your back out, now it hits, and then you're flipping forward. So it's essentially what you've done is, you know, what a rally car driver does. You know, rally car driver, they do Scandinavian flicks. So, you know, we'll draw a car because we're, you know, such an artist. Essentially, what a rally car driver does is if you want to make a real aggressive turn to the left, you first steer right, get the ass end to come out, you know, even if you have to skid it out, get it to catch. So, you know, you know, steer the right, you know, get the car to turn right in such a way that's a little out of control, get the rear end to catch. When it catches, you then steer, you know, into the corner. That catches what then violently spins the car around, so the car now goes all the way around in the direction you want to go. So essentially, you're almost like tripping it into the corner. You know, you steer left to trip it so that it wants to violently correct. So you're basically a rally car driver when they do a Scandinavian flick, they're starting a harmonic essentially. You know, they're using the motion of the car and the inertia of the car to, you know, store energy and then transmit that energy into a spinning motion. So, but we're not going to talk about cars just yet. So that's the disadvantage of, you know, motorcycles. The fact that you're always, anytime you're cornering, you know, motorcycles are great when they're upright going in a straight line. When you're cornering, you're always compromised because the lean means that your contact patch is, you know, always far away from the center of gravity or center of mass of the bike.